and this is something that, you hear sometimes where people say, oh, there's not enough assessors, right? So maybe we'll do a show where we just run down the bullets of why CMMC is not happening, just talk about them individually. But one of them is the cost, which we sort of talked about, some of the rumors that we're hearing. The other is there won't be enough assessors, right? Based off what we've seen from DIBCAC numbers, based off what we've seen in the field, based off what you could sort of hear about generally in the interface with 800-171 out there, the real constraint on the ecosystem is not the lack of assessors. That is a constraint on the process. But people generally say CMMC won't happen because there aren't enough assessors, as if everyone is ready for an assessment.
Right.
Tomorrow,
like, so rules are just going to pop in and people are just going to be waiting in line.
Or like there's 80,000 companies that are ready for an assessment.
Just reference last month's DIBCAC numbers and we'll understand.
Of course,
right? Like, so
the real constraint is on the implementers, right? I mean, there's Summit 7 and some of the folks that we compete with that are also very good. And there's just a lot of folks in the ecosystem that focus on implementing requirements, getting companies ready to go. There are not very many of them that are oriented around this set of requirements. And so when people say there's not enough implementers, I always say to zoom out and say the real problem is there's not enough people to implement and sort of shepherd people through these requirements. So I know that, prior to coming on board with Summit 7, when the 2020 rule came out that established the DFAR 7012 clause and SPRS scoring and all of this stuff, everybody's backlog went up overnight. Because just the amount of demand skyrocketed and the capacity to get people through that first wave of implementation just didn't match up. I mean, it was a pretty long time for people to get fully through the implementation process. And that was a small fragment of the number of companies that will respond once the CMMC rule comes through in, early 2023. So you're going to have primes say, we want you to be CMMC certified now. When are you going to get CMMC certified? And then they're going to turn around and come to a company that specializes in getting people ready for CMMC. And they won't even be able to get started for
6 months,
30 days,
sometimes
45 days, 6 months.
I feel like it's going to be longer. I feel like it's going to be this process where everybody just floods, right? And then the market's just going to get so flooded with people that need
it's a non-zero amount of time to get started. And this is an interesting point because it's something that you spent a ton of time developing, and something that we just recently at Summit 7 put out was this 7 steps to CMMC sequence of blogs, as well as some video content sort of explaining what does the timeline look like for implementation? What does it actually look like to go through all these processes? What does the Gantt chart look like for start to finish, from status quo to assessment viable at the end? How much time does it take? You have to take whatever that block of time is, which we'll link to those resources in the show notes, and slide it to the right based off of the backlog that the implementers will face when the rule comes out. So all of a sudden you have companies that are saying, we don't think it's going to happen. It happens. And then they find out that they won't be ready for their assessment for a year, like 18 months. If your primes turn around and say, we're going to go with the companies that were early adopters and they're going to be ready in 30 days, that's a dynamic that is completely outside of phased rollouts and waivers and whatever other changes are associated with CMMC 2.0. That's just a market dynamic at that point.
Yeah, it was the start to finish timeline that was provided in the 7 steps was 52 weeks, and that's all sunshine and daisies, right? That's not any of those extra elements or those added, different deterrers that could come in and possibly like sway you 2 or 3 weeks here. What about holidays? What about, it's just,
what about budget cycles?
Also
I mean,
true.
This is, one of the things, right? I mean, we're here at the end of the year, right? People are projecting what they're going to do going into 2023. We potentially have the rule come out in the middle of Q1, end of Q1. The heat is really turning up beginning of Q2 in the middle of this budget cycle that you plan for. One of the reasons why the government kept saying, you attested to 171, start with 171, do 171, is that by the time the CMMC program comes up, you're getting in line for an assessment. You're not getting in line for your implementation, right? So if you haven't started or you don't have a lot of confidence in your implementation against 800.171a, you start stacking tons and tons of time to the left of your ability to go through this assessment. And it's just that's something that is a very concerning, I think, when people see it mapped out, like in that 7 steps documentation. So when I hear people say, hey, my leadership thinks CMMC is not going to happen, the first step, I think, is saying, what makes you think it's not going to happen? And then sort of going into, here's one example of a timeline of getting ready. And it's about a year for what's going on. And there won't be enough people to help everyone. So it's a year plus to get through that process.
So